Why I think John is in the right.
A couple of
I
things.
personally find
One,
it mind-boggling
excessive
that
violence
students in
is
the comic
wrong.
and readers in
This
real
is
life
too
can see
wrong.
how
You're
John
mentioning
readers
same
how
as usual.
after all that
I
he
am
went
John
through
feels
the
like
world.
having
John,
good
so
because
you
the
do
world
this
is
like
insane.
and reading Unordinary actually gave me cancer. New chapter.
Who the hell is John?
It's hard to overstate the, let's say, division of John Doe from Unordinary. Unlike his name, John is not a simple character. He has thrown everything many readers have felt certain about straight into the trash. How readers normally feel and understand how characters should behave isn't how John behaves. Of course, this is part of the charm of the series. However, because of this, many people have raised an interesting question. Was John Doe from Unordinary, the main character of the series, ruined? 300 plus episodes, 15 videos, and years of discussion about just one character, and it's not quite the answer you're looking for. So what better place to begin Unordinary than Unordinary? Not the series, mind you, but the book. You see, the series begins with not an introduction to the world, or to the premise, or to the characters. Heck, John isn't even name-dropped during the prologue, and barely appears in the episode. But it spends time to briefly explain this book, the book Unordinary. A book that follows a world that has one super-powered person in a world filled with normies. This super-powered person helps the entire world. He saves lives, he spreads wealth, he helps the weak, but dies. Not in a tragic way, because his death brought charity, caused peace in the world. Remember this, it's important for later. Anyways, Unordinary, the webtoon original series, follows the students of Wellston. The world of Unordinary is very similar to series like the fantastic Sky High and My Hero Academia, I guess, where the world is filled with super-powered people and we follow the one student that doesn't have powers, wink wink. Basically the opposite of the book I mentioned before, but that's kind of where the similarities end. As Wellston isn't some new school for up-and-coming heroes, it's just kind of like a school, like a normal one, like one you or I went to, but instead of normal and annoying high schoolers, it's packed with very annoying high schoolers. Oh, and they also all have insane powers, also an insane amount of money for repairing the school. I mean, these kids destroy school property literally every other day. Where are they getting this money from? Instead of superpowers or quirks, we have abilities. Anything from lightning manipulation, energy blasts, shields, time manipulation, explosions, energy whips, there's a lot of them. However, we follow the one person that doesn't have an ability, John Doe. The series is a purposeful twist on manga or anime the same genre. Like how most anime have colorful haired main characters, John is one of the very few people with a normal color hair. The premise started with, what if we followed the side character in an anime? Anyways, life for John was often a living hell, to say the least. Living in a world where abilities are how people show and define their strength and their status, especially in the school system where the hierarchy reigns. The strongest will rise to the top and the weakest will fall to the bottom. And like the hierarchy implies, there are those at the very, very top and those at the very, very bottom. At the start of the series, we have the king, queen, Lord may she rest in peace, and the jack that run the school, Arlo, Remy, and Blake respectively. Some of the strongest members of Wellston, only beaten out by two. Seraphina, the old queen and current ace of the school, known as a goddess among students. Seraphina is considered one of, if not the strongest student of Wellston. With time manipulation as her ability, she stood at the top alone. But she stopped caring for it, stopped caring about everything. The weight of expectations, the stress of being the queen, of being this perfect student. It all came crashing down on her, eventually realizing what's important in life isn't the things that she cared so much about. Which brings us to John. Both Seraphina and John share the main character role, but John really clings on to that title, being the star of the show series for basically the entire time, and for good reason. Like I said, John joins the ranks of My Hero's Midoriya and Sky High's William Stronghold, being in a world with superpowered people with no powers. But like those people, there's more to John than meets the eye. Not just a powerless in a world full of powers. We start the series with John, the crippled, a word to describe someone without powers in the world of Unordinary, which is honestly an interesting way of labeling them. A crippled, a person with a severe limitation of a specific kind. And because of that, John was bullied a lot. He was an easy target. While he was actually a good fighter, your skills don't matter when people can just shoot shoot blasts of energy from their fingers and control lightning or time somehow. However, that's just it. John isn't an easy target because he's powerless. He's an easy target because he chooses to be an easy target. Before Wellston, John went to New Boston, where he was at the bottom for a while. He was a cripple, but eventually he learned he did actually have a power, the ability Aura Manipulation, the ability to mirror and amplify other people's abilities and use them for himself. But that's just the thing. John was at the bottom for a long time, but then suddenly being shot up to the top meant he wasn't mentally prepared for what that meant. People with strong abilities are taught the weight and responsibility of their powers. Granted, some people learn that lesson better than others. Actually, I don't think anyone learns that lesson all that well, but John didn't even get to learn those lessons. And no matter what people tried to teach him, he had real life experience. And those experiences were the daily beatdowns by people with powers. That was the norm for him. He hated it, but that was the standard way of living. So when he did get powers, he went on a rampage. He fought through everyone that looked at him weird, getting way too violent way too quickly. Claire, his low-tier friend, and the reason he even learned about his powers, was super supportive at first, spending time with him to learn and teach auras and how to use his powers. She did it because they were friends, and she saw how often John hated being at the bottom and how excited he got when he had his powers. But as time went on, John became worse and worse. Claire started to notice this a little too late, noticing his violence, his revenge mentality, his inability to listen to anyone, and then he would push it too far, as he lost his friends to gain the throne. Claire, distraught and feeling that she's created a monster, had one final vision about John. Her powers are clairvoyance, I forgot to mention that, where she gathered a bunch of students together to confront John. She thought this would be an opportunity to get him to actually listen, to get him to see the pain he was actually causing. She even lied to the Jack to get him to ally himself with her. But it didn't work, as he absolutely destroys everyone she gathered and is expelled from New Boston, in which he's forced to endure readjustment classes. I never really went in depth with this moment. While it's super important to the story, it's kinda hard to talk about this level of abuse. Can you imagine that? For 3 months. 3 months of someone brutalizing you. 3 months of being locked in a room with no contact with another person other than probably food and water. 3 months of someone digging into your brain to pull out every single mistake you're the most ashamed about. The horrible actions you've committed. All while someone insults and degrades you, calling you worthless, a lost cause, doomed to fail. And then not to mention being literally physically, mentally, verbally, and emotionally abused for those 3 months. After that, he was ruined, likely severely depressed, which is when his dad wrote him a book, Unordinary. See, I told you it'd come back. It was a story about someone who was just as strong as John, perhaps even stronger. But instead of someone bullying the weak, it was someone spreading charity, spreading peace, spreading joy. But John was too broken to see himself as that hero. He was too broken to imagine himself being a good person. So he took a different lesson from that, to put faith and trust in those with power, that everyone had something to offer, that there are people in charge who want the best for others, and specifically, that it wasn't him. Before anything really happened, we hear him explain to Seraphina that if he was qualified to help change the world for the better, he would 100% join them. We see this with a weird amount of respect he has at the beginning towards superheroes. As Wellston puts these, let's be real, really disgusting superhero death polls around the school, of course Remy is absolutely livid by it, since one of the people on the list is her brother, but John is somehow even more disgusted by this. While Remy just rips it off and burns it, John rips it in half, shaking with rage at the thought of these being put up, and then starts beating up other kids. John has an interestingly large amount of respect and admiration for those high tiers who gave their lives to protect those who can't. Because of this, John saying if he was qualified was originally meant to be taken as, if I had powers, I would help change the world for the better. But after seeing the entire series, it is now instead, if I was a good person, I would help change the world. John doesn't see himself qualified to be a good person if he uses his powers. So he decides to resign himself to the bottom, to be a crippled. Now, if you've read the webtoon or seen the, unfortunately, around 15 videos that include or talk about John, this is all stuff I've said before. And honestly, it's why John is so interesting to not only enjoy reading, but to talk about. You see, John's actions, his motivations, his reasoning, it's all just a little questionable. Just a little too morally gray to be accepted and then moved on with. This is actually why I made my very first video on John. I guess we'll play the clip even though I've seen it and it is incredibly embarrassing.
All of that backstory was very important for one main reason. Because sometimes I kind of root for John. I kind of do want to see him kick butt and wreck Arlo's hierarchy. He's fighting the system. But there's another part of me that understands that to a certain extent, what he's doing is wrong. He's fighting, but he's brutal. He shows no mercy and often may go too far. So that brings the question, should I root for him or against him? Is John a victim or a villain?
Just in case you didn't hear my iPhone recording and Google drawing more than 4 years ago, all that backstory was very important for one main reason. Because sometimes I kind of root for John. I kind of want to see him kick butt and wreck Arlo's hierarchy. He's fighting back against the system. But there's another part of me that understands that to a certain extent, what he's doing is wrong. He's fighting, but he's too brutal. He often shows no mercy and may go too far. So that brings up the question, should I root for him or against him? Wow. I kind of made sense back then, huh? Anywho, that's not only still kind of true, but somehow gotten even more divisive. John, as the years have passed, that's right, years, has seemingly gotten worse and worse and worse. But now I have 15 videos of comments to see. Most people agree that his actions weren't necessarily the best. However, many, at least at the beginning, stood by what he did. John's actions might not have been the most appropriate, but they were actions that were reasonable. Actions that we probably would have done if we were in his situation. To a certain extent, he was a sympathetic anti-hero. His actions were morally gray, but his motivations weren't all that bad. He wanted to tear down a broken system, a system that not only sent him to the nurse practically every other day, but a system that pushed his best friend Seraphina to her breaking point. A system that caused him to be sent to readjustment classes. Classes that physically, mentally, and verbally abused him over and over and over again. A system that made every student of Wellston turn their back on Seraphina the second she loses her powers. This system is not a good system. Sure, the system works as intended, the strong will rise to the top, the weak will fall to the bottom, but that doesn't change the fact that the system is hurting a lot of people. John standing up in season 1 was John standing up against a system that was broken and hurting people at worst, or working as intended, but still hurting people at best. The point is that the system was a bad system. John tried to live outside of it. Season 1 John, or the crippled John, was powerless, sure, but he still walked around with confidence. He was still relatively happy. Granted, he was getting hurt a lot, but he had a friend he could hang out with, someone he can get boba with or go to the mall with. More than a year ago now, I made a similar video. Granted, I feel like I'm always checking in on John, but the reason it was so similar was because of this topic of change. In that video, I was a little more focused on John's downfall and his eventual rise back up. However, if there's a word that I think should be associated with John, it's definitely change. How John changes throughout the series and how John inspires change. Just take a look at the beginning of the series. Even as a crippled, John's words and his actions inspired others to change. Seraphina is a prime example of this. Seraphina was someone who lived so closely to the established system, so afraid to go against it or speak up for herself. She was trapped in a cage of expectations, her mother's, her school's, even her own. John was a breath of fresh air in a stagnant system, where the school would badmouth her the second she got a B- on a group project, where people would talk behind her back but be so afraid to say anything directly towards her. John wasn't that. He would stand up against her multiple times, even when she beat him up, even when she sent him to the infirmary, even when she threatened him, he refused to stand down. At first, they clearly didn't get along, but no one understands what Seraphina was going through more than John. Even when they didn't get along, John would stand up for Seraphina, and that was the driving force to help her realize that she didn't need to be trapped anymore. She didn't have to live for anyone other than herself. Seraphina is a prime example of how John inspired someone to change for the better. However, change doesn't always inspire positive change. Arlo noticed that John didn't fit the mold, that he already changed everything just by being there. His presence was an oddity in a perfect system in his mind, and he's forced to try to fix that oddity, that bug in the system that didn't belong. It's incredible. A lot of the series is about change, whether it be people wanting to stay in their comfort zone or people being too rigid, unable to see change. Arlo was unable to see the positive side of change, but honestly, I can't really blame him. Sure, at the beginning, it's easy to call him that, but rereading the series, you realize that he's not wrong for thinking this in this world. You see, when he became king, Wellston was a mess, mainly because of Ray, Remy's brother. Ray is a really admirable person. He hated how the tiers were divided. He hated that people caused pain and suffering onto others for the fun of it. When Ray was in charge, he changed how everything worked. He asked high tiers to take it easy on low tiers and encouraged low tiers to reach for the sky, and that was a problem in this world. Wellston, and well, the world of Unordinary is different than our own. People expect to just be able to beat others down because they're strong. When Arlo became king, he actively had to show his force to create just some semblance, mind you, not a lot, some semblance of peace. He couldn't see John's changes as anything other than a massive problem that needed to be beaten into submission. You see, talking about John is all about talking about his change. The change between 300 episodes and 2 seasons, his rise and his fall. As I mentioned before, John's character really likes to walk that line of what is or isn't acceptable. You wanna know why I've made more than 15 videos that talk about John? This is why. John playing jump rope with that line is what makes John so appealing for me to talk about and so appealing for so many other people to read, engage, and discuss about. John's change really starts here, right when Arlo stabs him in the back, ambushing him in the middle of nowhere and forcing him to fight back. Here, John fights back. I'm not blaming John for fighting back. I'm not sure anyone was blaming him for fighting back. In fact, I think most people were rooting for him to fight back. And that's fair. He should be fighting back. Look, I'm not an advocate for violence. I'm a peaceful guy. But Unordinary is a world that runs on fighting. People are so used to fighting one another, it's kind of a requirement to speak the same language. And I'm not going to encourage someone to just sit there and take the punches if they can defend themselves. But the problem isn't that John can't speak that language. My boy can teach a class in that language. But instead, John's problem is his inability to hold back. How often he wrecks his opponents, how often he goes too far. After this ambush, which turned into a one-sided massacre, and surprisingly not on the person who was ambushed, nice going there, King of Wellston, John didn't really do much after. I mean, like, really, think about what he actually tried to do before Seraphina was assaulted and lost her powers. He fought back against Arlo's ambush and casually threatened Elaine, really only to keep both of them quiet and not to tell anyone that John had powers, but that's it. He didn't force Arlo to do anything. He didn't make Elaine his servant. He didn't really try to do anything other than call some bullies garbage and get a little more angry. The only time he did try to make him do anything was when Seraphina got stabbed. He only tried to tear down the hierarchy when his best and only friend, Seraphina, started to get bullied, and especially when she literally got kidnapped for a day and the students got no consequences for a kidnapping. Whatever. John didn't stand up before because he was afraid. Yes, afraid of sliding back into a monster, but more importantly, sliding back into a monster in front of Seraphina. This was John's turning point, when John really started to change. Now here's where we need to address something, and that is John's change itself. John's change here makes sense to me and so many other people. Not only is he fighting back against a system that left him hurt basically every other day, but more importantly to him, a system that caused his best friend, and really only friend, to endure the same difficulties as he did. This change was overall a good change to me and everyone else. And if I'm being honest, that's not really what I wanted to address, or why these videos are made. What I mainly wanted to address is Season 2 John, and the 3 variants that we get of John throughout the series. The first John, the Cripple John, the second John, the Joker or King John, and the third John, the Redemption John. I've said John too many times. Change is funny. because John is technically the same person throughout all of these, but these 3 variations of John are so drastically different that they feel like different people, almost to the point where one feels fake comparatively. Like one feels like a lie. Look at all 3 of these Johns. Literally the only difference between them is, I don't know, a couple weeks? Maybe a few months at most? That's kind of just how change works. Sometimes we try to force ourselves to be better, like when John takes the cripple role. He's holding back, he's forcing himself to be a better person. I mentioned this a lot, especially in my What If video, but John treats his power almost like an addiction. He would rather go cold turkey than ever try to use his powers again. Kind of like how people who used to be alcoholics don't even want to go into bars or take a sip of alcohol, because it's a slippery slope. One sip might be all it takes to slide back into that life. And like an addiction, when John does slip back, he's ashamed of it. The episode after John slips back into using his powers, not into being a bully, mind you, or a tyrant or a monster, into just using his powers to defend himself after Arlo betrays him by isolating him and ambushing him, is also when Seraphina manages to break free from her mother's chains and find her way back to John's place. John is bleeding, bruised, cut up, broken, and angry. John had never felt more alone than he did at that moment. And when he hears Seraphina and sees that she's physically there, he breaks down in tears, remembering everything he did, and begs Seraphina not to look at him. When I first read this, I thought it was just John being ashamed of how weak he looked, or maybe everything finally hitting John as his one and only lifeline is there in front of him now. But taking it in this context, John is ashamed that he was weak, not because he was hurt, but because he slipped back into using his powers, slipped back into being cruel and brutal, and he didn't want Seraphina to see him like that, didn't want her to see him as a monster. That's why he could never tell her he had powers, not just because he'd been lying to her this entire time, but because he was actively afraid of showing it off to her. John didn't know how to use his powers correctly. He didn't know how to hold back. That's why he was a cripple. That's why he didn't use his powers. I toss around the word change a lot with John, mainly because it's John's main theme. But I wanted to address that his change is different each time. John changes 3 times throughout the series, each time for a different reason. The Cripple John was him forcing himself to change, forcing himself to be a better person, forcing himself to be a person that would never be a monster again. Cripple John is the combination of that change, never using his power, always playing defensive, never on the offense, always giving others the power, always using his smarts and his strategy rather than pure power. However, that change doesn't last. John changes again. This time it's a slide back into the person John hated. And really, this is the change that everyone has the most to say, good or bad. If he changed last time because he was trying to be a better person, this change was a slide back into the person he wanted to change from. Back into the awful, merciless king who would hurt even his closest friends. A change that he tried to stop, but one that forced his way back into his life. This change is so interesting to me, because it's a change that John didn't want, but a change that we did. From a narrative point of view, this change is so well developed, but from an in-character point of view, it is so far from what John wants. Someone who just wanted to live a normal life, someone who just wanted to fade into the background, but it doesn't matter anymore, because he already changed back into the person he was before. He can't just dip his toe in and then turn back. And since we followed John for 50 chapters at this point, we followed him for a long time, followed him through beatdowns and bullying, we got to sympathize with him. We got to connect and understand John. Of course, he's the main character. Because of that, we really get to connect and root for him. That makes sense. Not only is he a likable and interesting character, but we almost always root for the character we follow because we see their entire life. Even if they do some bad things, we see why they did those bad things. And because of that, we're willing to overlook some things. But that's kind of the point. Ura-chan, the author of the series, is a master of playing around with the relationship we have with the main character. I talked about this in my last Unordinary video, but Joker/King John is someone we're supposed to understand and sympathize with. We see his struggles, we hear his plight, his side of the pain very often, especially whenever royals or high tiers question John. The high point being this conversation with Remy at the end of season 1, explaining that royals aren't the ones protecting everyone, royals Royals are the reason John has been going through what he's been going through, explaining that the Royals are only going through what John has been going through all this time. They're being attacked for no reason. They're fighting a losing battle for no reason. A battle that cannot be reasoned out of. A battle that is merciless and one-sided. A battle with an opponent they don't know. It's something that John has had to face for years. John truly was just showing the Royals what he's been going through. Uru-chan doubled down on this in the most mind-blowing way that didn't fully click with me until I was actively looking back throughout the entire series. Before Seraphina's kidnapping, or more accurately before John decides to tear through the hierarchy to show everyone a lesson, think about what he's actually done as John. His first is, technically Arlo, because Arlo tried to take him out back and put him down and failed. Zeke, though, was technically the first one targeted by Joker, mainly as Upside Down Tuesday, but that's not the point. Look at what he did to Zeke. When Zeke's back was turned, he surprise attacked him, and after some gut and face punches, steps on him and then grabs him by the collar to finish him off mid-conversation, and then just leaves him in the middle of nowhere, unconscious and bleeding to be found by someone else. Brutal. But why did I go into so much graphic detail about it? Well, flashback around 20 episodes, when John moves into the Wellston dorms and Zeke surprise attacks John when his back is turned, and after some gut and face punches, kicks him and then grabs him by the collar to finish him off mid-conversation and leaves him in the middle of nowhere, unconscious and bleeding to be found by someone else. Look at his next victim, Junie, the green-haired girl. She's on the list because she kicked Seraphina down a flight of stairs and then took a picture to show the entire school, revealing that Seraphina lost her powers. Flash forward to when John attacks her. He beats her up, but the series makes a big point to show John Sparta kicking her down the stairs. Why did he beat up Aizen and a bunch of other students to look for Seraphina? Well, Arlo said, "Why don't you show me how it's done, John?" In response to John demanding Arlo look for Seraphina. When John confronts the people who kidnapped Seraphina, the people who locked her in a room and beat her up with no help, John blows up their exit, wrecks them, and then leaves them in a room alone with no help. You might have connected the dots on your read-through, but John's actions were just a reflection of his victims. It's kind of like this idea of karmic revenge. Now, I don't need to tell you how popular revenge stories are, how many female leads were killed and then thrown back in time to get revenge on their toxic family, fiance, husband, or best friend, all while being successful in finding love. That might seem weirdly specific, but that trope has too many series to list. Revenge is popular. Probably not the healthiest thing to admire, but it's popular nonetheless. Joker John is karmic revenge. People getting what they did or what they deserve or what they said. It's why it's so easy to root for John so early on. It's more than John beating up people from the school who deserve it. It's John getting revenge on people we've seen do or say the exact same thing to John or Seraphina, to people we like. It's the ultimate eye for an eye. Or I guess eye and arm and leg for an eye. He goes a little too far. You see, John was sending a message, but the problem isn't the message, but who he became after it. The message was sent. Everyone knows what John has been through. Everyone has been on the opposing side now. Everyone has been the weak, the powerless, the crippled, but what now? John was fueled by his anger. He can't just stop. Especially after Seraphina finds out, especially after Aizen rats him out, especially after the entire school finds out, especially after everyone's moved on. John can't go back to being the school crippled. He can't go back to being the powerless, the weak one after everything that's happened. That's not how change works. You can't just dip your toe in and then leave. We see before everyone finds out that he does try. He tries to be both the powerless cripple and the Shadow King Joker. But walking that line doesn't work. It causes both sides to struggle. Wellston goes into chaos. No one is in leadership and everyone puts on these Joker masks to get revenge. And his relationship with Seraphina struggles as he tries to pretend everything is alright, but when Seraphina confronts him, he breaks down, trying desperately to convince Seraphina that he's not the Joker. He's not this merciless attacker. But this is weirdly his last line of defense, so to speak. Seraphina is so important to John. It's pretty much why he does everything he's done up until this point. Her not knowing was really John's only reason for still being a cripple. When Seraphina confronts him about being the Joker, he's not only trying to convince Seraphina, but also kind of himself. Not in a split personality, my deepest secret kind of way. Spoiler alerts for that series. Sorry, but it's also been out for years, so I'm not so sorry. He doesn't want to fall back into being the monster he was before. He needs Seraphina to not only believe him, but trust him. Because how could he trust himself if she doesn't trust him? And when she doesn't, he slides straight back into his past self. Straight back into believing people are there to use him and then abandon him. So John fully accepts it, fully just becomes the Shadow King of Wellston, like it worked so well last time. And here is where Ura-chan has fully played us, but it's also where I have to bring up the title of the video. At last. I'll be honest, this script has been in the works for a long time at this point, and it started with a very different title, that being How John's Unordinary Handles Change. You might have noticed I've been talking a lot about change throughout this entire video, and the different types of change he goes through, but after some comments on both my video as well as Unordinary's comments, and really a lot of different social media sites, I think I needed to kind of throw my hat into the ring. I kind of thought I needed to answer the question. Was John Doe from Unordinary ruined? And short answer is, yeah, kinda, but that's the point. A lot of people think that John's character was ruined after this point. Gone is the lovable cripple, the confident, smooth-talking, strategic and skilled John, and in comes the King John, the one who overpowers his opponents, the one who shows no mercy to anyone, the one who seemingly swears every other word. This John was not well liked, and yes, your point? I think, personally, y'all are stupid. I think so many people fail to understand how cool that is, right? Like, Ura-chan, she got us. She fully played us. She got us to fall in love and connect with a character, then test the limits of that love that we had for said character, and then for a lot of people, break it. You know how hard it is to do that? How hard it is to make a character turn into a villain so smoothly and with such intention? I have to give props to her. Like, job well done. It's incredible how amazingly she's accomplished this. You have to understand that disliking a character isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mentioned this a very long time ago when I talked about what makes us hate certain webtoon characters, and something I stand by is the beginning. I mentioned that the author making us feel a strong emotion for a character, not the story or the webtoon or the plot or whatever, but a character is a job well done. Even if your job was to make them likable, I'd say it's a failure when you make them boring, when you make them disinteresting. And John isn't boring. We're weirdly okay with following a villain. I think a prime example of this is the webtoon I Get Stronger the More I Eat's main character, Sir Kim, a crazy criminal individual who can shapeshift into the animals he eats, and then he gets plopped into a fantasy world, and then he goes wild. This man is a villain. He is a straight criminal. And the series doesn't kid you. The series doesn't make it seem like he's this good person. He is 100% cold-blooded killer, and we're a-okay with that. Meanwhile, John is a bit of a jerk. He hurts people and at some point swears seemingly every other sentence, but he's not as bad as Sir Kim. But yet you don't see me making an hour-long video on Sir Kim, and I can't. The series is on Daily Pass. I can't talk anything past the 3rd episode. I think there are 2 main reasons. The first boring answer is that's who we signed up for. We signed up for the man who wanted to be an apex predator and eat anything and anyone that got in his way, like a bloodthirsty Kirby. We signed up for the criminal, the poacher, the one who got isekai'd into a world and then just became the villain. That's who we signed up for. Meanwhile, we didn't sign up for the Joker John. We didn't sign up for all the terrible things he's done. But I also think there's another element to that, and I have no better way to describe it than shame. I mentioned before that at first many people were on board with John doing John things. Many people said that they 100% would have done the same thing if they were in his position, and probably would have done it sooner. So what's changed over the years? John didn't stop. He became worse. Look, we love to romanticize revenge and anger, but no matter how much we do, we need to understand that these emotions are incredibly toxic. We love watching characters get revenge. We love watching them take it out on people. But the truth is that those feelings can and often are ugly, bitter emotions that rot people away and that leave you feeling empty inside. And Ura-chan did a spectacular job at showing that revenge, anger, pain, these feelings don't just fade away, they grow and cause even bigger problems when not dealt with correctly. The reason so many people started to say that John was ruined was because Ura-chan showed the natural path that everyone was rooting for, and it was ugly. It broke John. But I think it goes even deeper than that. I mentioned before that I made a lot of John videos, and that's kind of the reason I'm here. I've been making a lot of John videos over a long stretch of time. In fact, I started making these before season 1 even ended. The reason I bring this up now is because I'd say better than most people, I have a pretty good timeline on how people's view of John has changed and fluctuated as the series has gone on. When everything started, we rooted for John to break through everything and everyone, but it's more than that. I read a lot of comments saying that if they were in John's shoes, they would have done the exact same thing, if not sooner. They saw nothing wrong with his actions until John went too far, until the series made John to be the villain. Now, I can't prove that the same people who said they do the exact same thing also said John's character was ruined, but I'll say I haven't seen any people defending him as much in my recent John video. Ura-chan held up a mirror to us who said John was in the right and showed us just how wrong we were. We didn't like who John became because it was the harsh reality of who we would have become. We thought we could have stopped. We thought we could have done better, but in reality, the series shows us that doing what John would have done would have landed us in the exact same position. But that's only half my point. If you didn't like who John became, yeah, that's kind of the point. Even going through the entire series again for this video, this John arc is a rough couple episodes. Everything about John, from his actions to his words, makes us as readers kinda lose faith in him, but that's intentional. John isn't supposed to be likable in this state. He practically becomes the villain of the series, hurting everyone, even his best friend, even teaming up with Zeke, and we all hate Zeke. You have to understand that John became someone who he himself would have hated, but the reason that so many people stand by John at this state is because we stood by him before he fully became King John, before he fully became the Joker, before he started hurting so many people. Not to mention, it's not like what he didn't lead to anything good, because John technically succeeds. He gets his message across. Before, no one knew or really even cared all that much about the struggles of low tiers. Some people just outright dismissed them or didn't care, such as Arlo, who thought the struggles were just kind of a part of nature. Others only added to the problem, like Zeke or Gavin, who bullied others who were weaker than them because they wanted to feel some power high. And some just didn't know all the struggles, even if they wanted to do good, like Remy. Yeah, sure, she could have technically done more, but how could she? She's one person. Not to mention one person who just lost her brother and has dedicated a lot of her time to researching and fighting against an active terrorist organization. And not to mention that low tiers rarely share their plights. Why would they? The high tiers are the ones responsible for their problems. Who are they gonna tell? Another high tier? Because of John's slip into a villain, everyone became the powerless. Everyone saw firsthand the problems with the system, because instead of an us versus them mentality, now it is everyone versus John. Everyone is the weak and John is the strong. John showed that it was just a-okay to hurt anyone you wanted to because you were stronger than them. Y'all remember way back at the beginning of this series in this scene, episode 26, with Aizen's forced interview with John? The reason Aizen's interviewing John is mainly to get information about his past for Arlo, but he gets John into a room by telling him he wants to do an article about the struggles of low tiers. And while Aizen could care less about the struggles of low tier, even drawing himself with a six-pack, we get to hear John explain.
To put it simply, we low tiers don't have any rights. We're not able to defend ourselves. Everywhere is a danger zone for us, so we have to stay alert at all times. Life is scary for us. We can't do what we want or say what we think. One simple run-in could put us out for days or even a week.
Doesn't that sound familiar? Not having rights, not being able to defend yourself. No matter where you go, you're in danger of a simple run-in that can take you out for days, if not a week. Not being able to live the way you want or say the things you think because someone will put you in the hospital if you do. Now, I have no idea if this was planned, but man, is it exactly what's happening to everyone else. I don't think it was John saying, I'm gonna show you everything I've been through. Instead, I think it's just the consequences of being powerful, of being on top after years of dealing with the exact same pain. We get this way later, 180 episodes later, in episode 207, with Blake being livid that John can do John things just because he's strong.
You think hospitalizing students is okay? You think enabling swarms of masked attackers to terrorize the school is okay? You think threatening and humiliating people for wanting to join a club is okay? Tell me, Aizen, where's the damn line? What does this guy have to do for it to finally not be okay? Or does him being stronger than all of us just get him a free pass for everything?
Blake's anger here is completely understandable. It's unjust that people get beat down and sent to the hospital and suffer no consequences just because they're strong, just because they're a high tier, just because they have a powerful family. But the thing is, yes, even Seraphina points this out. It's always been the case, and John doing John things exposed the problems with the hierarchy. It's not a new concept either, not to John or to the low tiers or to Wellston. Something I haven't really talked about is Ember. Ember, for a majority of the series, is very divorced from John. It's not something too important to his story, especially not towards the beginning. It's more relevant to Remy, Aizen, and Blake. Ember is what I see as the macro story, the more worldwide issue compared to the happenings at Wellston. But even in the vigilante storylines, we see the consequences of the hierarchy, the micro story. Whenever any town is saved by a power-boosted mid-tier, the townsfolk's first reaction isn't to shower Remy, Aizen, and Blake with thanks or admiration. They're actively terrified of them. Another strong person is here to cause problems. John isn't the only person who's gone through this. Wellston isn't the only school that's been through this. This is a worldwide issue. The strong not only rise to the top, but dominate the weak, and there's nothing the weak can do about it. John just showed the other side to everyone. Because of this, John technically did what he wanted to do. His message got across. Remy and the other high tiers were able to form a safe house, a place where anyone can go and hang out, do homework, play games, be protected. But that's kind of the thing, isn't it? John is an angry, emotional person. He's someone who's been treated unfairly his entire life. He was bullied and treated like garbage for not having powers. Then he finally did get powers, and when he treated everyone the exact same way he was treated, he got expelled and put into brutal readjustment classes where he was physically, mentally, and verbally abused. Because of that, he became the cripple of Wellston, and he was treated like garbage for another 2 years. And when he did finally get to the top again, then and only then is when they make the safe house, a place where anyone can be and not have to worry about being beaten down and broken. Cripple John would have loved this. It's unfair that the moments he gets into power is the moments everyone realizes that there's a problem, but sometimes change for the better is unfair at first. But that's just it. John was fueled by his anger, especially since it's justified anger. But after this point, he has no one and nothing to direct his anger towards anymore. Not only do Remy, Aizen, Blake gather together to form the safe house, but Remy actually starts to see how high tiers act entitled and abusive for the fun of it. Blake realizes the importance of being strong for others, being a protector. Aizen starts to realize the importance of helping others, using his position on the school newspaper to help spread the word about important issues. Seraphina uses her crippled status to bond with other low tiers, to help them and show them that they can stand up for themselves, that they can all work together to help protect each other. Heck, even Arlo, Mr. I'm gonna beat you up until you remember your place in the hierarchy because the hierarchy is the most important thing ever. Goodness, that was a long line. Apologizes because he realizes that the hierarchy isn't set in stone, that it isn't perfect, that it needs more work. Everyone, and I mean everyone, is trying to move on. Everyone is trying to fix their past mistakes. Everyone is trying to do better, but John can't. It's so crazy that John's anger was the one thing that got everyone to realize the problems with the system and start to change for the better, but it's also the one thing that's holding John back from that positive change. It's the one thing holding him back from supporting the safe house, the one thing holding him back from what he wanted in the first place. This concept is given to us directly by Headmaster Vaughn. He's the reason John got into Wellston as a cripple, the reason that John and other students go wild into school, the reason that Ray was allowed to change the hierarchy up. We hear directly from him because he's the embodiment of all the hatred that has been built up within our hierarchy. John is the embodiment of hatred within the hierarchy, the anger of the low tiers, the ones that have been abused and beaten down their entire life, but also in another aspect. One I'm not sure was super intentional. John is the anger of the low and the high tiers, the frustration of being weak and the frustration of being strong, of doing everything everyone else has done to you and being deemed as a monster. We get all this near the mid-season finale of Season 2, episodes 221 to 225. John kinda hit a peak of unbearable, angry at the world, angry at the safe house, angry at Seraphina, Arlo, Remy, Blake, Eisen, Cecile, anyone that looked at him he was angry at. And he finally explodes at Arlo and Remy. But Arlo just moves on. No hidden agenda, no secret plans, no secret rebellion, nothing, absolutely nothing against John. John wanted so desperately to vilify others, so desperately to believe that everyone is out to get him, that everyone's a villain, that everyone is a monster. Because if they're not, if everyone else isn't the monster he believed them to be, if everyone else is moving on, if everyone else is actually making a difference, actually learning from their mistakes, what does that make him? Would he be the monster that everyone says he was? When he's yelling at Arlo and Remy, we get two voices inside John. The loud, aggressive, merciless, angry voice inside him. The one that's talking over every reasonable thought, any thought that shows actual weakness or actual thoughts. But we also get a calm and understanding and reasonable voice that knows the truth, but is afraid. Afraid of who he's become, afraid that he can't actually change, afraid that he'll always be the monster he was deemed to be. We get The Crippled and the King, which is, by the way, a sick book title, but my point still stands. John is angry. He's lashing out at anyone and everyone. Even when Seraphina tries to talk and reason with him, even when they're fighting, John's not really fighting Seraphina. He's fighting back against the ideas of change, of redemption, of becoming better. The entire battle is a battle against himself, against the old version of himself, the brash, arrogant, merciless, aggressive king of New Boston, the one that hurt his friends, the one that was a tyrant. Then, and only then, is Seraphina able to literally break down the walls that John has put up, to literally show John the light, to pull him out of the void of despair and anger and self-hatred he's fallen into, to bring him out, not to betray him, not to punch him until he learns, not to show him violence or aggression, just to let him know that he's allowed to grow, that he isn't alone. Which brings us to our last John, the current John we see, the Redemption John. Not the redeemed John, mind you, we still have a little bit to go before we get there, but the Redemption Arc John. As I've mentioned before, John's change is triggered by something different each time. I said his change into the crippled John was John forcing himself to be better, forcing himself to not be a monster, and that's technically true, but there's more to that. He was forcing himself to change out of fear. Afraid that he would fall back into being a monster, a tyrant, a brutal, angry person who would hurt those around him. John was afraid, but the thing is, at a certain point, he was no longer afraid of that outcome. He reasoned with himself that everyone else is a monster, that everyone else is brutalizing others, that everyone else is a problem, and they don't deserve mercy. That reasoning, that lack of fear caused him to slip back into the person he was before. So what's different this time? John is definitely still afraid of being a monster. Yeah, but more importantly, John actively wants to get better for Seraphina. He wants to be better for his friends, the people who love him. Yeah, that element of fear is still there. It's always gonna be there. It's gonna be hard for him to forget that fear. It'd be hard for anyone to forget that fear if you've been through what he's been through, but instead of wanting to change because of it, he wants to change despite of it. We get this concept pretty directly with, interestingly enough, Headmaster Vaughn. I mentioned him before, but he's always kind of been a confusing presence in the series. In a series so fan of screw the authorities, Headmaster Vaughn is, the authority here, is actually very in favor of the same thing. And we get to learn a little more about him later on in the series. As before he was a headmaster, he was a juvenile delinquent instructor. Which, if that means nothing to you, fair. I didn't actually tell you what that was, because I didn't let you know that that's actually what Keon was. Yes, Vaughn's job for years was to use mental force to psychologically break students that the government or society deemed in the wrong. And I'll be honest, this isn't hyperbole at all. He himself admits this with this quote. Something I
learned the hard way. No matter how much you try, you can't force someone to change. It takes time, and they have to be willing. Otherwise, the results could be tragic.
When you try to force change onto someone, it doesn't work. At least not permanently. It will never actually be a solution. The hierarchy is a clear example of this. No one actually respects the people in charge. No one actually respects the hierarchy. They're just forced to follow. Given the opportunity, you see how quickly people turn. When Seraphina lost her powers, no one respected her. Everyone immediately wanted to be the God Slayer. Same thing with John. He was mentally forced to change. So he did. Too ashamed to use his powers, but it was a band-aid on a broken bone. It didn't actually heal or change anything. Given the opportunity in the right circumstances, or I guess technically wrong circumstances, John slid back into who he was before. But now John wants to change. He wants to become someone Seraphina or his dad could be proud of. He wants to be someone he could be proud of. And we get to see that change. Sure, he meets up with old friends, gets the whole story, apologizes, and it finally explains what happens to his dad, but we really start to see this when the mid-season break ends with John's return to Wellston. Changing mainly for Seraphina, but others also get to see how committed he is to becoming a better person. Remy gives him a second chance, a chance to prove he wasn't the person before. Arlo keeps him informed about any situations with Seraphina. Even low tiers in the safe house are starting to trust him a little more, inviting him to play around the poker, to talk to him from time to time. Even Blake, someone who absolutely hated his guts, was willing to listen to him, willing to be on his side. Look, John hasn't completely changed. He still gets angry. He still has trouble holding back. He still has trouble seeing the gray in people. Still sees people, including himself, in black and white, especially in the black. But one major thing has changed, and that is his support system. And no episode sums that up better than episode 252. This is the middle of an interesting transition point for John and for the readers. We just got back into season 2 after the whole, well, everything being a Joker, then the Shadow King, then losing his best friend, then his lifeline, then being outed by Eisen, then going mad, then being suspended for some time, realizing the amount of hurt he's caused, but also knowing his people on his side, and then finally his return. His return is a tricky moment. Unsurprisingly, not a lot of people even want to look at him, much less engage or talk to him. This is only made worse by Seraphina joining Spectre to try to get her powers back. So she's off doing things without John, and of course he's become suspicious, joining the safe house to try to keep an eye on her. The safe house becomes an integral part of the series. It represents a change in the stagnant hierarchy. It's something that John needed before, something that only came about when he revealed the problems of the hierarchy to everyone, almost created in contrast in him. The second half of the second season, which is the wildest mouthful, the safe house is the primary focus, its existence in a dangerous school. John wishes to win them over. He struggles to do so, eventually winning some of them over, but not enough to go on the safe house trip. But he goes anyways, yada yada yada. He gets into this argument with Blake. Blake is very much a foil to John throughout the series. Not opposites, just characters that highlight each other. Blake is a straight shooter. He's honest, he says what he's feeling, and he's pretty aggressive sometimes. When everyone gives John a second chance, Blake is really the only one who doesn't. And you know what? Fair. It's hard to give someone another chance, especially if you've been through what Blake has been through. Though the same thing could be said the other way around. But actions speak louder than words. During the amusement park trip thing, it wasn't important so I didn't mention it, and some other royals are causing some trouble, which is where Blake stands up against them. Honestly, it's a really cool fight to show off how strong Blake is, until all 4 of them start fighting against him. John can't bring himself to do anything. He can't bring himself to use his powers because of his fear of going too far, because of his fear of being a monster. Instead, he provides tactical support to Blake, telling him which one to go for, their stats, their abilities, how they work, all that great stuff. Unfortunately, it then makes him a target, and when they're all going for him, Blake basically takes a bullet for him. And that's when he stands up and fights the royals, beating them with relative ease, but then starting to go a little too far again. It's interesting. John originally went too far because others went too far. Others bullied and beat him down every day, so when he got his powers, it was only fair that he did the exact same thing to anyone else. Then it was because he was dragged into the fights. But now, it's almost like he's fighting against old versions of himself. Powerful, cocky, egotistical, brutal, terrible people. Luckily, Arlo is able to stop him, throwing up a berry to make him come back to reality and realize he's gone too far, and he stops himself. These are 2 action-packed episodes with fantastic character moments and the product of the development for not just John, but Blake, Arlo, and even the safe house nerd who calls Blake and John the kings of Wellston. That moment makes me smile. Someone petrified of John originally, not rooting for John's victory. But it's the following episode that's really important. John and Blake are cuffed, mainly to ask them questions, and Blake starts to notice John shake, basically having a mini panic attack. Blake kind of puts their past grudges aside and they speak openly and honestly about what they've been through, the importance of who they are now and despite who they once were, using their powers to help others, ending with Blake saying, "Because if I don't, then who will?" That last line seeming to resonate with John a lot. Before, John's change was entirely independent. He was entirely on his own. Even with Seraphina's support, she didn't really know John even had powers, much less wanted to not use them and change for the better. And his dad was too far away to really do anything about it. But this time there are people who know that he has powers, who know what he's been through, but don't use it against him, instead use it to help him out. Seraphina and Arlo are there to help John hold back. Seraphina's strong enough sometimes to stop him, and Arlo can just physically hold him back for a second. Remy is one of the very few people to give him another chance without seeing anything at first. Eisen is there, and even Blake, someone who, while he can't fully relate to John, is someone who has dealt with anger and pride, and has figured out the importance of his ability. You know, the whole with great power comes great responsibility thing, but also the importance of keeping himself in check, the importance of being strong for others. This time, John has people around him who can help him change, to help him keep him accountable, to help him become a better person than he once was. And you know what? It's working. John has been gaining the trust of the safe house, using his powers to fight against people who honestly deserve it, to protect others, and so much more. This culminates in two places. First, here, still during the school trip when Spectre attacks the safe house, trying to take away Blake's ability. John still struggles to use his powers, still terrified of fighting, of going too far. He's still angry too. He can't easily explain himself without yelling or resorting to at least a little bit of violence. You see, when John knows he needs to use his powers, he basically has a panic attack. He stresses out. He remembers every single moment he messed up, every single moment he went too far, every single moment he got too angry, he hurt someone too much. These thoughts literally paralyze him. And while they appear here, they get overwritten by other thoughts. His dad telling him to show his strength, Blake asking if I don't, who will, Seraphina asking him to use his powers to protect others. These thoughts help push him to use his powers as he tries his hardest to protect everyone, as he puts his life on the line multiple times to protect these people, even teaming up with Eisen and Blake to protect everyone. People who hated him and he hated, to take down Spectre even at the cost of losing his powers. To the point that even after losing his powers, even after taking Terrence down, even after seeing Seraphina losing consciousness, you know what the first thing he asks is?
Is everyone else okay?
And the other place is William. I'll be honest, I wrote this entire script before William's death. It was never really supposed to get into William's relationship with John, but based on his death now, I think it's important to take a look into it. William, as not just John's father, but John the Menace as a child's father, definitely tried his best. But as a crippled and with his wife just not in his life, John was hard to handle. After John's meltdown at New Boston and then his readjustment classes, it leads William to write the book, Unordinary, comes full circle. A book about the opposite of their worlds, a world filled with normal people and one super-powered person. This book was William's way to reach out to his son, one that would lock himself in his room every day, all day. One that would replay the moments of pain and suffering he inflicted onto others over and over and over again. It was a way to teach John that with great power comes great responsibility. It was a lesson John never really learned though. But William's death really changed everything. I'll be honest, I kind of didn't expect William to be dead. I know webtoon series, I know always expect worst case scenario, I know never trust the author, but there was just something about William's death that gave me a little bit of hope that he survived, or something, anything really, but to see him like that dead was honestly heartbreaking. That truly one of the very few morally good characters of this entire series was gone. No final goodbye to his son, no seeing his wife one more time, nothing. Unordinary, in my mind, has always been a difficult series. Not difficult like it's annoying or a pain to get through, but a series that tackles hard topics and situations. Bullying, discrimination, abuse of power, morally gray characters. There's a lot of this series that could be really difficult, and that's kind of the point of the entire series, and death is no exception. We've seen death of family before in this series. We get it with Remy, someone who lost her brother as he tried to do the right thing. While we really didn't get it with Seraphina, we get the abandonment side with her sister. And John has had both of these, abandoned by his mother and having his father killed without even a goodbye. It sucks, it really does, but I think it highlights two important aspects of the series. Unordinary is a series that's meant to make you emotional. Not just here, but throughout all of it. Do you feel angry by Arlo's actions at the beginning? Disgusted by the readjustment classes? Betrayed by John's decisions? Heartbroken by William's death? That's the point. The series is supposed to make you feel bad sometimes. It's supposed to bring out emotions in you. That's amazing. The fact that you as an individual feel emotions for a character is the mark of a good series and good writing. But secondly, and more importantly to this video, John. John himself is an emotional character. He reacts big and without thought. He's reckless in that aspect, but most of the time, his grief filters into rage, into anger, into hostility. It happened when Arlo betrayed him. It happened when Seraphina lost her powers. It happened when Seraphina got kidnapped. When Arlo tells John to fix his own mistakes. When Remy calls him out on his hypocrisy. When Seraphina calls him out for lying to her their entire friendship. Even moments after he started this arc, where he grabs Terrence's collar when he's about to betray the safe house, or smacks Doc's face after he and Seraphina got attacked. And while it's still very clearly the case before and even here, being angry at the government, his mom, even his uncle, he gives everything a second thoughts. To me, this shows just how far John has climbed back up. When Seraphina calls John out for lying, he went full tyrant. He became the new king and enforced a new tyrannical rule over the entire school. But he's changed. He's still angry. He's still upset. I mean, his dad died, of course he's still upset, but he's thoughtful. He actually takes a second to think about what happened and what will happen. And no better moment shows this off in episode 330. After finding out John's dad died, the royal trio go to him, and John does what we all wanted him to do throughout this entire series: talk, express his feelings, his anger, his sadness, and actively work with the rest of the royals. John never worked well in a team. He was a solo act. Only those beneath him who knew their place was allowed within his circle. But here, it's planning. Heck, it's helping people who he beat down a season ago, which comes full circle with Remy. Remy and John have kind of been opposites. John has a lot in common with basically everyone else in the series. A similar mentality with Seraphina, a similar status to Arlo, similar anger to Blake, similar arrogance to basically every student in Wellston, but he's never really had a lot in common with Remy. Remy throughout the series is probably like the best person in Unordinary. And I don't mean the most interesting or best written character. I mean she's actively one of the most morally good people in this series. Everyone is kind of a bad person. To be fair, from our point of view, a bad person. Yeah, good people don't fight each other literally every day, but that's just the world that we're dealing with. Strength and power reign in the world of Unordinary. If you don't show it off, you're gonna be pushed to the bottom. Granted, some people use that strength to get some power high. Most just use it as a shield, almost like a reputation that you shouldn't mess with someone because of their strength. Meanwhile, Remy and her brother Ray had the perspective that the strong should protect the weak. A lot of people like to throw a ton of shade at Remy because she didn't see when people were being bullied, but the bullies were smart about it. They never did anything around her. There was no easy way for her to know. And during the series, before the Joker stuff, she was too preoccupied with Ember, trying to keep the Wellston kids safe from a very real threat. She would try her hardest to look out for the students in her own way. Meanwhile, after Seraphina lost her powers, John stopped. Before, he would stand up when he saw people getting bullied, but after a certain point, he would just turn away. And it was on full display at the end of season 1, John versus Remy. Bitter truth versus optimistic ideals. John's anger at Remy's naivete. Even John exploding at Remy and straight up insulting her dead brother. But here we are, the same place, the same people, different time. And now John, after having his dad die, after having his best friend charged and currently on the run, John Doe, the most alone he's ever been, on his own volition, apologizes to Remy. These moments show us how far John has really come. Show us that John is a wildly complex and in-depth character. So I had an idea. Look, I've been doing this for years, but there's always been a fear of mine. While I cover a lot of webtoon series, I've always been really afraid to try to talk to the author. Who am I, the goofy little shy guy knockoff, to these authors who've created worlds, characters I love and hate, stories that make me feel joy, heartbreak, anger, sorrow? I've never reached out to one, and I get terrified the moment anyone give me any attention at all, but I thought it was important here. I decided to try and reach out to Ura-chan herself and ask her. Hello, Ura-chan. I wanted to reach out to you. I've been making John Doe content for a while and have been a big fan of your work, but I wanted to make this big video for John, and I wanted to get your voice on the matter. I wanted to know your thoughts on John. What was on your mind when you created this character, putting him through these arcs, and if there's anything you want to let people know about him? With such a complicated character, there's a lot of opinions about him. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on anything, John. As a big fan of what you've done, and knowing many people are big fans of your work, anything you'd want to share would be wonderful. All the best, Shy Chef. And that's it. Look, I'm not sure what you expected. Ura-chan is the author of a story with more than 1 billion reads, her own book and store. She was a panelist on the Chicago Comic-Con Entertainment Expo. I didn't really expect her to answer me, but I think it was still important to ask her the important—
Hi, Shy Chef. Thanks for reaching out. It was great meeting you and I appreciate all the in-depth Unordinary videos you make. A bit of background info on John. John originally started off as a personal writing challenge. I thought it'd be interesting to transform his character from the nicest, weakest person to the strongest, meanest person in the smoothest way possible. But the more time I spent with him, the more I wanted to dive deeper into his character. I did a lot of research regarding trauma/PTSD and general psychological behaviors, and drew a bit from my own past experiences to make his character as realistic as I could. Nothing in Unordinary is black or white. The story is written from many different perspectives from characters with different upbringings. Everyone, just like in real life, has their own way of thinking based on their own past experiences. I think it's important to keep an open mind and learn from one another because no single viewpoint is correct. So it's great that John has sparked so much discussion, and that there are readers who love and hate him. Many readers were frustrated by the fact that John spiraled so far. They felt that John wasn't contributing, or was even slowing the plot down. And this was the intention. I think when someone hasn't dealt with their past traumas, these traumas will continue to resurface, which makes moving forward very difficult. Trauma is a long and repetitive cycle, and it takes time to process and heal. Contrarily, there were also readers who supported John and condemned the Royals for fighting back. I think as a writer, it's part of the job to make each character's decision seem reasonable. But in my opinion, everyone regardless of their past is responsible for their own actions. Actions have consequences. It's okay to feel angry and misunderstood, but once your actions start to affect others, then those others also have a right to react/retaliate. One of the greatest justices that you can do for yourself is to forgive your past mistakes. Forgiveness helps progress. John hated himself for what he did in New Boston, and he projected that hatred onto the Royals. He wanted to prove that the Royals were just as evil as he was, which is what prolonged their feud for so long. Once he took steps to forgive himself, it became much easier for him to let go of his differences with everyone else. Look at our boy now! He's even teaming up with the Royals. John was never supposed to be a cookie-cutter main character, or a hero who leads the pack and defeats all of his enemies. He's just someone who's trying to heal from his trauma and not let his past define him. Hope this was helpful. Best wishes, Ura-chan.
You heard that right. I met Ura-chan at a book signing, and she recognized my name, and I was incredibly embarrassed, but that's not the main point. It was an honor to get a response from my silly little John question. I reached out to simply get Ura-chan's thoughts on John, and the discourse around him, but I got so much more than I expected. Now, this video has already gone on for a while now, and while I would love to add another 10 pages based on this email, or do a victory lap on every single video I've made about John, and on Ordinary, especially that Does John Have PTSD one, that was like one of my favorite old ones, I think that kind of defeats the purpose of the response, huh? The discourse is there. It was always meant to be there because John was always meant to be a character to inspire discourse. Like she said, he was never supposed to be a cookie-cutter MC or a hero who led the pack to defeat all his enemies. The active concept for him was a slippery slope into a bad person, was actively meant to be a story about different and opposing perspectives. John was ruined, but that was the point. The point was for a character we loved and connected with to have the wrong mindset, the wrong emotions, and the wrong way of dealing with it eventually break him. He loses so much. Of course, he's not the same character from episode 5 or whatever. In some weird, twisted, shameful way, we're all defined by our past experiences. The good and the bad. Our distrust from when we've been burned before. Our anxiety from the weight of expectations. Our stubbornness from being brought up only learning one way. Our anger from our pains. To be human is to be irrational. To be human means that sometimes our thoughts and emotions get in the way of seeing what's actually happening. The truth in front of our very eyes. It's why I hate when readers ask why John isn't being rational, because no one will ever be truly rational. No character or human for that matter will ever not let emotions or feelings get in the way of their thinking. Yes, John was ruined, but it's beyond just from a writing perspective. Instead, the world of Unordinary itself ruined John. The society that places so much emphasis on power and authority, so much emphasis on knowing your place and pain, broke a child who couldn't even fight back, whose mother was blackmailed and taken to be experimented on, whose father was killed for speaking his mind, whose best friend is on the run for being at the wrong place in the wrong time, who was beaten down and bullied for years, and when he wanted to get his just desserts, when he wanted to be on the throne, when he finally wanted to be safe and the one in control, he fell from grace, got physically, mentally, and psychologically abused, told he was worthless, that he's just another failure, doomed from the beginning to be another statistic. But when we're talking about this point, most people usually mean from a writing standpoint, not an in-universe one. We're talking literature, story, series-wise. And here's where you and I need to have a real talk. I'll be honest, this video, it wasn't meant to convince anyone of anything. Something we really need to address is that Unordinary is art. And by art, I don't mean a masterpiece, a word that I've really grown to dislike based on how much it's used. But what I mean is that Unordinary, like other types of TV shows, movies, comics, music, songs, actual works of art from the fan art on Instagram to the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, is art. And unfortunately for everyone, all art is subjective. Every opinion matters because there is no definitive one. Yeah, we can reach a general consensus on many types of art, and there is the author's original intention, but I mean this time the author's original intention was for there to be debate and discourse. It's hard for any one thought process to be generally agreed to be true, especially with the case of someone who shifts around the morality grayscale like it's going out of business. Trying to find one answer to a question as general as was X character ruined is impossible, because I could make this entire video, I could make it twice as long with the best arguments in the world, and yet people still wouldn't be convinced, and that's okay. I made my first John video more than 4 years ago at this point for one main reason, because I was conflicted. John was a character who I loved and honestly agreed with more often than not, but there was always some things that I never quite was on board with. And when he was about to fight Remy, I didn't know which side to take. Sure, John was ushering in change, but not all change was good. And while Remy had problems, it didn't stop the fact that she actually cared for the students of Wellston. Even though she wasn't doing a lot, she still wanted to change for the better as well. I was conflicted. Myself as a reader was conflicted. But more importantly, I was really impressed that a series would make me so confused, so conflicted between the main character and basically some side character. Unordinary was always a series meant to challenge expectations. Like Guru-chan said, it's a story about perspective. Never black and white, a story about every side, and John is proof of that. Not only is he the only one with a normal hair color, but just the fact that the main character was fighting the wrong battle for the wrong reasons, that John wasn't a good person for a lot of season 2 and a lot of season 1, that his actions hurt more than they've helped, that he pushed away people who cared about him because he was afraid. but it's also the reason why there are so many moments throughout the series that feel as great as they do. When we see some low-tier nerd call Blake and John the kings of Wellston, when we see John being invited to play poker or listen to Evie's scary stories, to fight alongside Blake and Eisen, to take down Terrence, when he actually finally joins the safe house, when he teaches other students hand-to-hand combat, when he teams up with Remy, Eisen, and Blake to fight off the authorities, to protect the school and get revenge for his dad to the point that he was almost willing to throw his life away. All these moments are honestly amazing because we saw where he came from, because we experienced moments of him being a tyrant, that these moments are so great. It was because he was a villain that his connection to Arlo, Remy, Eisen, Blake, the safe house, and Seraphina feel so special, so amazing. Honestly, the biggest reason I love John is because of what he represents. That anyone, good, bad, right, wrong, can change. Anyone can be a better person. All it takes is surrounding yourself with the right people and a second chance. That anyone can become better than who they were. And isn't that spectacular? So thank you, Uru-chan, for making a character like John. A character that brings people together, even if it's some nerd on YouTube making an hour-long video about him. You did an amazing job, and your hard work doesn't go unappreciated by this fan. And thank you for watching. If you're here, thanks for being here. Oh god, I've sat down for too long. I've decided to hold off my little speech, my little channel speech, so I didn't interrupt your John video. If you're wondering why I started doing shorts only content, this is why. I've had this script in the work for a while now, and doing short content was really the only easy way I could do both this and make weekly videos. I also wanted to thank my fellow Webtoon ambassador, PJ Scribbles.
Hello, that's me. I was the person who was crazy enough to read a 22-page script, pending, about some Webtoon character. Multiple times.
Thanks a lot. She's great. Check out her channel. We also did a Stagtown collab a while ago. She's also the person who designed my sprites and this background, and actually a lot of this stuff around. This is also my first dive into long form content. Someone said they can listen to me talk about John for hours, and you know, this is for you, my friends. I do have other ideas for long form videos. I wanted to look at Omniscient Reader maybe, going into just isekais and reverse isekais in general, talking about revenge, or talking about like redemption arcs. I don't know. I could really talk about anything I want to for an hour long because I have a lot to say about so many different things. And if you have any ideas for what I could talk about for an hour and a half or more, please let me know. I'd love to get into something. But that's all I have for today. So thank you for sticking around for these last couple months with less content than normal. And thank you for all the years I've been Shy Chef. Take care.